Intensity is something that you have to learn and you have to be comfortable with. We founded Nomad Royalty. We managed to grow the business and ultimately sell it to Sandstorm in August 2022, around $750 million.
We're going for a run with one of the youngest and most successful junior mining CEOs, Mr. Vincent Metcalfe, CEO of Comet Lithium. Lithium is the major ingredient in rechargeable batteries for mobile phones and electric vehicles, and Comet is delving into Quebec's lithium frontier, looking for new sources of this material in James Bay. Joining us today, Quebec City, we have Vincent Metcalfe, CEO of Comet Lithium. Vincent, good to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'll go into your background. I want to know why mining? How did you start? I know you have a finance background. Let's expand on that. We want to know where you come from.
Yeah, no, so I was in at the University of Montreal, I was playing football, always been in the sports activities, but during my between my second and third year in university, I ended up in Toronto doing an internship in the mining group with Bank of Montreal. And from that point on, there's been no going back to another industry. And what was great about that is I went from a team sport to a very awesome team, but in mining.
Right.
It was 2005, 2006, the start of the mining boom in a sense.
Yeah.
And we had a very, very small team, but an awesome team. And, looking back at it 20 years later, all the guys that I was with, or the girls, are all pretty much still in mining, which kind of proved us that we had a really awesome core. And, from that point on, and decided to stay in the business, and here we are.
Yeah, I want to know how that that experience you got into playing a high-level sport in university, being exposed to that, how did it help translate into being in a CEO position, making a decision, working with a team?
Intensity is something that you have to learn and you have to be comfortable with. And, being in a CEO, running a publicly listed company, everything changes every day. So from that point of view, I think you learn that through what you do in life. And obviously sports is a very important piece of my life. And I think it translated really well to what I do in my day-to-day as a CEO.
100%. I want to know, you have a really good success story from one of the first companies you founded. Can you expand more about that?
Yeah, so, after doing about 10 years of banking, I switched over to the corporate world on the mining front, joined the Cisco group, did about 4 and a half years there, and then decided to go on my own. And in 2020, we founded Nomad Royalty, which ultimately, we call it a pandemic story.
Pandemic story, tell us.
Well, we launched the company basically a week before the pandemic hit the world markets. And we managed to list 2 months later. And then during, the COVID era, 2.5 years, we managed to grow the business and ultimately sell it to Sandstorm Gold in August 2022.
Right.
So that's why we call it the pandemic story.
What did you sell it for, the Sandstorm?
Around $750 million.
Right.
So, but ultimately the important thing is that we were able to grow it, even though it was a tough environment. And from that point of view, I think that's the important thing is you deal with what life brings to you and you make sure you make the best of it. And you think about the shareholders when you do that too. So,
right.
It's, you always have to look at it from a big perspective, longer term, where do you want to go? And I think that's what we managed to do with Nomad. It's ultimately, that's why we were successful.
So first success story, now you're building your second one with Comet Lithium. Can you explain where the assets are located and why they're so special?
Yeah, so with Comet, what's interesting is, so truthfully for the last, 18 years, whatever, was mostly focused on gold, but I always really looking at other commodities. And that's what I think is really interesting with Comet, is you're really looking at a different perspective from a long-term point of view. Because when I look at it for my kids, for the next generation, lithium, copper, all these transition metals, we're going to need a lot more.
Yeah, the energy metals.
So that's what really interested me when we started looking at ways of getting involved in the lithium market. And last year we saw huge craze, ups and downs. But from that point of view, you know, the other things that are important, we've learned a lot over the years, is jurisdiction. So when we started looking at the various possibilities that were offered to us, when we identified Comet, it had a great project, a flagship project in Liberty, which is right next to the Adina discovery, which is operated by Winsome. It had the right jurisdiction. We're also in Quebec. We're also based in Quebec, so that helps a lot with the language barrier. It gives us an advantage from our team. And importantly, it was in the commodity that I strongly believe that over the next 10, 20 years, we're going to need a lot more. And we're also going to need to figure out, you know, as a continent in North America, there's going to be a lot more investment in the supply chain. 100%. And mining is a vital part of that supply chain. And I strongly believe Quebec will be a major part of that. And so for all those reasons, we decided to focus on Liberty. Our team actually just landed on the property yesterday. So they're doing a 2.5-week program as a phase 1 exploration program this summer.
Right.
So that should be coming out. We should have some news and results coming out shortly after that. But you know what? Again, it's really the focus on lithium and on the long-term perspective for the future generations.
Right. So over the past bit, right, the lithium prices, they haven't been great. So if I'm addressing the elephant in the room, like, how does that affect your business? And, you know, does that affect anything going forward?
Well, we're a publicly listed company, right? So, you know, obviously you're affected every day when the markets are open. I think there's been obviously a craze phase last year.
Yeah.
Which was obviously, you saw the commodity prices move maybe a bit too much compared to where it should have been.
Right.
But I think the interesting thing, whether it's in lithium exploration in the hard rock like we have here in Quebec,
yeah,
or just in general, understanding how the lithium and how the EV penetration is going to impact the different supply chains. The important thing is we have to, you know, also you saw the commodity price lower.
Yeah.
But importantly is you have to take a 10-year approach, a 20-year approach. And I think you ask anybody here in Quebec, or if you go over the pond in Europe, or if you go to China right now, the EV penetration is going to keep on accelerating.
Right. People are going to keep buying EVs, electric vehicles, and needing that lithium for those cars, right? Is there any replacement for lithium? Like, is there other competing commodities that can be used for batteries?
Well, you could look at different chemistries, but at the end of the day, you're always going to see a big component of that being lithium. Right. You're also seeing sometimes, you know, sodium and so on. But when you look at the different chemistries, the sodium is very, very heavy. So it's fine for battery packs and storage facilities. But for EVs, you need light batteries.
Right.
So from that point of view, lithium is always going to be our preferred route.
Good. Right. Vincent, I want to know, what's the hardest part about your job? And then also, what do you enjoy doing the most?
So I think the hardest thing, which is also something I enjoy in a sense, is the instability or the volatility of the job. Because
the high, low, low life.
Well, no one day is the same, right? So one day you're talking to investors, the other day you're talking to suppliers or, you know, geos. So that's what's fun at the same time is, you know, you touch to a lot of different things. Obviously dealing with a tough market like mining has been, you know, experiencing for the past few years.
Yeah.
Not great, but when I'm a very positive person. So you wake up the next day and say, okay, maybe yesterday wasn't as good as it was supposed to be, but I'm a strong believer in commodities and the use of, raw material. And I think that's something that as an industry, we always say we have to do a better job of showing the attractiveness of what we do.
Yeah.
But it's a true statement. I think in general, the population doesn't necessarily understand, the critical aspect of sourcing raw materials.
Yeah.
So that's super important.
Yeah.
So that's why, what do I not like? It's like not necessarily always having a lot of stability.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's what also makes it fun, is every week is different.
100%. I'll follow up actually on the critical aspect of those commodities and the situation in Quebec. You're seeing it in terms that Quebec will be a big player in lithium. In the future, you're looking like 20, 30 years down the road. Right now, I know that lithium is mostly transformed in China. Can you see that happening maybe in North America and having those plants here to transform it?
Look, I think the plants are going to get built. What the governments can't forget is, you need to mine the material.
Yeah.
And sourcing the raw material is going to be the toughest thing right now. And I strongly believe that in Canada, we have some of the strictest regulation in terms of putting projects in operation. But importantly is we're going to have to speed up that process.
Right.
We're doing things really well.
Would it be like the permitting process? Like which part of it?
Permitting process, the strategic aspect of, dealing with communities. At the end of the day, if you're going to have a plant on the other side there,
yeah,
you don't want your lithium to be coming from Argentina,
right,
or from Chile. It doesn't make sense.
That makes sense.
We're already living that with our own oil refineries right now, where our oil is coming from the other side of the Atlantic and being refined in Montreal. This makes sense.
Yeah.
Because we have all these reserves out west. So that's what I think is super important for us, is making sure we source the raw materials in Quebec, in Ontario, and Canada. Because at the end of the day, it's clean, it's on par with regulations. And I think that's where the government really needs to push,
right,
for the next 5 to 10 years in terms of accelerating the permitting and, the decrees to put these things in production.
Right. So investors, they can invest in a lot of different spaces, different stock to buy. There's even cryptocurrency, real estate. What would be the main reason why an investor would look into a junior lithium mining stock like yours?
Well, I think there's a lot of, stocks out there, especially in the junior market. I think the important thing is when you look at who's running the company, management is obviously very important. And some of the points I've touched on earlier, you want to make sure you're in the right jurisdiction. Obviously in Quebec, you also have the tax advantages of flow-through shares, which helps you raise money and, minimize dilution.
Right.
So for our point of view, when you look at Comet, our portfolio, and that's what's, for me, when we got involved only in November last year.
Right.
So we're really...
It's very early stage though.
It's very early stage.
A lot of upside.
Yeah. And when you look at the portfolio, you're not looking at moose pasture in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Liberty is basically sandwiched between the Adina discovery, which now has over 70 million tons of lithium, and Winsome's advancing that very rapidly.
Yeah, Winsome, the Australian company.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have Rio Tinto in Midland, who are drilling. They just started drilling last week, and they have a $7 million program this year.
Wow.
So there's Winsome, which is literally 500 meters west of us. You have the Rio Tinto Midland JV to the east of us, only a kilometer away. So from that point of view, it's a great piece of land.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to get consolidated by someone, in the future. That gives you a base in terms of value.
Right.
And then when you start looking at the rest of the property and the portfolios, you have Troilus East, which is a huge land package right next to the Troilus gold mine.
Yeah.
Which has over 11 million ounces of gold equivalent. They just filed their feasibility. It's a brownfield site. So that piece of land has been underexplored over the past few years. So that's definitely going to be a strong focus of ours.
Right.
It's got lithium potential, copper potential, gold potential. You're also close to Sayona, the Nomad deposit. So there's a lot of things going for us. And then when you start peeling the rest of the portfolio, there's a lot of value in probably another 8 or 10 different properties that we own.
Right.
And that's why when you're an investor, you look at the different things out there. You say, okay, I have my base value with Liberty, which truthfully, the minute we find stuff is going to give us even more value for that piece of land.
Yeah.
Then you have the Troilus one. So those two are incredibly strategic.
Right. And what's your outlook for 2024 now with Comet Lithium? Like, what are the milestones coming up?
So yeah, so right now, as I was saying earlier, our team's on the ground for the next 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks.
Good drilling program.
At Liberty. That will be followed up with a drilling program, likely at the end of the summer, early fall. We're also going to be doing a program at Troilus with a huge team to cover this property, with kind of a first layer, base layer of exploration and prospection, which was never done.
Right.
And then I always say, you're either a buyer or a seller. So if nobody wants to buy our stuff, we're going to go and buy other stuff. So we're going to keep growing the platform with, properties which we think are going to be accretive to us, and also provide that extra, kick for investors.
Right. You did talk about flow through.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? Like, how can an investor get into that?
So look, if there's different ways of doing flow through, but typically you're either an accredited investor or you invest through flow through funds. So flow through funds will buy a lot of different shares of different exploration companies and offer it to an investor in a fund like structure, or you can invest directly in companies, which at that point you have to be an accredited investor. But what that allows you to do is when the company, for example, Comet, we did a flow through raise last year at 85 cents, even though we were trading around 50 cents. But what that allows the company is to raise at a higher level and flow through the tax deductions to your investor. So the investor gets
the biggest advantage with full threat is the tax deduction, right?
The tax deduction. So that's why you issue it at a higher price than where you're trading.
Right.
And then, from that point of view,
it's about 80%. What is it?
So last year, I think our premium was, something like that, like 85%, 80% on top of where we were trading.
Right.
So it's a big advantage for the company because you're minimizing your dilution. It's a big advantage to the investor because they get exposure to a great company, but also a tax break.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah. Last question for you, Vincent. I want to know, I'm assuming you're an investor.
Yeah.
What's your biggest win? And what was the percentage win that you did? And what's your biggest loss that you've had in investing?
I've had a few losses if stocks going to zero, but you know what? That's your risk as an investor.
Yeah.
In terms of wins, I've had a few wins in terms of, especially in that 2007 to 2011 era, whether it was the first uranium boom back in 2007, and I think that's what we have to look forward to.
Yeah.
Is the current mining market and exploration market has never experienced what it experienced between, say, 2007 and 2012, since 2012. And I think that's what we're shaping up for, is the next 10 years, we should have a very, very positive window for commodities.
Right.
So hopefully these 10 baggers, 20 baggers, we get a kick at again. So.
Yeah, so getting 10x, 20x returns. Is there anything else you want to add to the audience before we finish this run?
No, but you know what? I think the important thing is making sure your management when you invest is legit. The cap structure is important. Making sure you don't have too many shares outstanding. At Comet right now, we have 25 million shares outstanding.
Right.
So the minute we have a discovery, that stock can move very, very quickly.
100%.
So, yeah, no, I think on that point, as I said, I think the next 10 years of mining and exploration should be really, really interesting. So.
All right, so keep an eye out for Comet Lithium. We're going to be placing their ticker symbol right in this video. We're going to have their link to their website down below as well. If you have any questions, email their IR team or even Vincent directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, have a good one. Thanks so much for joining, Vincent.
Hey, pleasure. Thank you.
Great.